Hello, I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. Welcome to another one of our series of leader interviews, and we have an excellent interview today. We all know that human and animal health are indivisible. We cannot divide them. Our well-being affects theirs, and animal well-being affects ours. There are significant threats ahead of us that involve the interplay between humans and non-human animals. What are those threats, and how can veterinary sciences play a role in that? Because they're already doing amazing work in the space. I can think of no better person actually to discuss this with is our friend, Dr. Andrew MacCabe, who is the CEO of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges here in Washington, D.C. Dr. MacCabe has really had an extraordinary and I'd say perhaps unique career. He's not only a veterinarian, but he's also served as a member of the American Public Service, as a serving officer in the Air Force for nearly a quarter century. We worked around the world on public health threats, and also here in the United States. He's also a lawyer, so that's quite a remarkable combination. And so it's really a distinct pleasure to invite and introduce Dr. Andrew MacCabe, and welcome Dr. MacCabe to the interview. Andrew, nice to see you.
Thanks very much, Keith. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
And I think that the first question is, why did you become a veterinarian?
Well, I will tell you that you've hit some of the highlights of my career, and it's certainly not a career that I ever would have predicted. My interest in veterinary medicine began comparatively late in life. That is, compared to most people who choose a career in veterinary medicine. We're different from most of the other health professions in that many young people think about becoming a veterinarian at a very early age. In contrast, I was about halfway through my undergraduate work before I decided to pursue a career in veterinary medicine. And for me, it came because I was interested both in agriculture, production agriculture, animal production systems, as well as medicine and science. So the combination of all of those things came together under the umbrella of veterinary medicine. And that's what encouraged me to consider a career in veterinary medicine.
And what was interesting in your work as a veterinarian, you did a lot of work with dairy herds in that space, and you also did a lot of work in the public services at the Centers for Disease Control, working with the FDA. Maybe you could just share, because I think, to your point, a lot of students wonder, what am I going to do? But your career as an arc, you A, didn't plan, but B, it's been incredibly, remarkable, impactful, and fascinating. So could you share maybe with us some of the highlights, some of the most fascinating and interesting moments that you've had as a veterinarian, and perhaps also your work internationally as a public servant?
Yeah, it has been a very rewarding and wide-ranging career. And I think I began with, in veterinary medicine, looking at individual animal care. And again, my interest was in dairy production medicine. So learning to work with dairy cattle, performing, basic medicine, preventive medicine techniques, but then also surgery and reproductive herd health and those sorts of things. But very quickly, you have to learn to work at the herd level or the group level as opposed to the individual level. Of course, individual animals are important and need individual care, but the real work happens at the herd or group level. How do you keep an entire herd of dairy cattle healthy? And then it doesn't take much more than that to step back yet another level and say, well, what about, in our case, the national herd of dairy cattle? What do we do to prevent the incursion of transboundary diseases and protect the national herd of dairy cattle, whether it or in other food-producing species, our own animal resources? And then finally, what does it look like at a global level? Because as we all know, infectious diseases do not respect boundaries. And our weakest link in any system is our most vulnerable point for the incursion of a novel infectious disease or a transboundary disease or an infectious disease that's going to jump the species barrier. So that was much of what I spent my career in. And it, again, very rewarding to look at this on a global scale.
So it would be fair to say, Andrew, that your experience on an individual basis as a veterinarian compelled you and drove you to taking the bigger picture and to working as a public health officer for nearly a quarter century?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, I think it was a realization that my influence as a veterinarian working on an individual farm could only reach so far. And even within our whole practice area, which was in Northeast Ohio, that was the extent to which I could exert my influence. But by working in an international organization like the United States military, I had the opportunity to work at the policy level and influence those types of things. And that's when it was like taking it to another whole level, exponentially greater impact.
Well, I think that message that you're giving is something that a lot of students really want to hear because they want to have an impact and they want to have the biggest impact possible. So how you went from, if I say the micro to the
Yes.
macro, is really quite a compelling story, right? To have that impact. And when you're working internationally, what was, if you were to speak to a large group of students as you do, what would be your message to them about actually becoming a public servant and being able to do that work internationally?
Well, for me personally, this has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. I do think back often about individual cases that I had, and some that went very well, some that didn't go so well, all of which were important learning experiences. But again, it was that ability to uh, translate that into the bigger picture and have an influence on community health, especially in the developing world, as we are doing now with our association, working with veterinary schools all over the world. That's when I start thinking about how we can elevate the practice of veterinary medicine, improve the quality of life for people and animals around the world. And that's a pretty incredible thing, Keith, to
Yeah.
have that sort of an influence or an impact.
And I think that a lot of people don't fully appreciate the public health officer corps, Andrew, that you were a member of, and how, in my view, that you guys are silent heroes, and the work in Mike's incredibly talented people like yourself, remarkably well-trained, dedicated public servants who work all the time in the service of the protection of American citizens and more globally. So I mean, it's just a really an amazing group of people. To a person that I've met, you've all been just remarkable and humble individuals doing amazing, honestly, jaw-droppingly amazing work
Well, I
for the public.
appreciate that, Keith, but I must tell you also that was my interest in the work that you're doing at CUGH. And it's that ability to work again on a global scale and to elevate the delivery of healthcare, the practice of healthcare around the world. Because again, we happen to live in a country with vast resources, and we have significant inequities in our own system, of course, that need to be addressed. But when we look across the world, there is so much that we can work on together. And that's what has drawn me to this aspect of veterinary medicine.
Yeah. And we really appreciate under your leadership, Andrew, the AAVMC became a member of CUGH and vice versa. And honestly, we're extremely grateful in your efforts to to connect veterinary sciences into this larger global health enterprise. And to that end, tell us a little bit about the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges. You have American in there, but you have members all over the world.
Indeed. So it's a slight well, not a misnomer, but it is an American association because we're headquartered in the US. And what draws all of our members together from around the world is that they are all accredited by the American Veterinary Medical Education Accrediting System, the AVMA's Council on Education. So we represent, of course, all the veterinary schools in the United States and Canada because they have always been part of that accreditation system. But beginning in the early 2000s, the accrediting agency offered accreditation to veterinary schools around the world. And many schools in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, the Caribbean, and a few other locations voluntarily chose to use this accreditation system. And they appreciate that the word American is in our title because it represents that American system of accreditation. And that's what brings us all together. And our mission is to advance veterinary medical education worldwide. And we do that by bringing together the faculty and administrators at our member institutions to share innovative approaches to education and assessment, and to advance the pedagogy of veterinary education. That is how we teach and assess veterinary medicine.
And one interesting outcome of that, which I learned recently, was that in 2022 you held the first Vet Med Africa Symposium. That's exciting.
It was a remarkable event, and I was so very glad to participate or partner with the veterinary school at the University of Pretoria in South Africa to host this event. We had representatives from veterinary schools throughout Africa. And Keith, this was the very first time that those deans and administrators and faculty had ever come together. And we were just very pleased to be a small part of helping to organize that meeting and bring it together. And here was one of the more interesting things that I learned about that meeting. I think we all know the importance of Africa and development in Africa to the world economy and the world health. But much of the development in Africa is based on relationships from the colonial and the imperial era, when many European countries dominated parts of Africa, excuse me. And so even though that imperialism has come to an end, the vestiges remain. And what I mean there is that those countries still have very strong bilateral relationships. What's missing is the intra-Africa relationships. And so the African Union was developed just to promote within Africa relationships. And what I learned at this meeting is that many of the veterinary schools in Africa, they have relationships with veterinary schools in Europe and America, but not with veterinary schools within Africa. And to me, that's the great opportunity. And that's what we learned by putting this symposium together and started developing some intra-African relationships, which I think holds great promise.
It does indeed, isn't it? But at CUGH, we've been doing the same thing. And that's the message that when you put it on the table, our colleagues in Sub-Saharan Africa say, yes, we definitely want to do that. That is their primary source. And we that are not from that continent will be secondary players. They appreciate the engagement, but they want to take that lead. And it's just a new era in development and training.
Exactly. Yeah, very promising.
And one of the, your annual meeting is fantastic, Andrew. And every time I go, and thank you for allowing me to go this year, I learn a lot. And I see the leadership among veterinary science, veterinary medicine, and how it applies to others. And one of that was the previous meeting. You've done incredible work in integrating experiential competence-based service learning and bringing different disciplines together with veterinarians so we can learn from each other. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, so in terms of our programming at our annual conference, this is always one of our goals. It's important for us to bring our own community together to learn from one another, but equally important is to bring in voices from outside our community that we can learn from. So some of our closest comparators, of course, would be human medicine, both allopathic and osteopathic medicine, but also dentistry, pharmacy, and nursing. We have much to learn from those other health professions, how they recruit students, how they train them, how they assess them. All of us share this interest in clinical training and what is the most effective way to engage students in these experiential learning environments where they can get that hands-on experience in an environment where it is safe to fail, where they can make some mistakes but recover with appropriate mentorship, coaching, and teaching. So we can learn much from one another, and that's a big part of our annual conference.
And I was walking by one of the poster sessions at your conference, and there was a dental student there in her last year. And I stopped and I said, "What's a dental student doing at a veterinary sciences meeting?" And she shared with me a remarkable program. I think it was in Texas, where they brought final year dental students with final year vet students together, and they provided primary care to communities that were low income that would not normally receive the vet care for their pets or the dental care for themselves. And it was supervised, obviously. But it was, I mean, you could just, the mind boggles at the opportunities for different disciplines to come together with veterinary sciences to provide that type of experiential service learning to communities that wouldn't get it.
There is a real lesson there, Keith. I'm glad you brought that one up because we've seen this before. So, of course, the mission of any university is to engage in, to have some community engagement, right? A service mission. This is part of the any large comprehensive university. So we have seen examples of medical schools, nursing schools, and dental schools reaching out to their communities to provide services for members of the community that may not have the resources to get these services through ordinary channels. Oftentimes, these are people who are experiencing homelessness, or they're indigent, they don't have the resources to do things. And what we have found is that those universities where there is also a veterinary medical college, is that when the veterinary students go to these communities, and in addition to offering services to the people who are there from the nursing school or the dental school or whatever, if we also offer care to the animals from the veterinary students in the veterinary college, the attendance goes way up.
Mm.
And do you know what that says to me is that there are many people who, especially if they're experiencing, living with very limited resources, they might say, I don't have the time or the effort to take care of myself. I'm struggling and I just need to get a job. But if they have a pet, if they have a companion animal, and they say, and I can get service for that, then I'm going to take the time to go because I care about my animal. I care about my pet, and I'm going to utilize those services. And then while they're there waiting, we say, oh, by the way, do you know you can go right over here and get some health screening from the nursing school, or some dental screening from the dental school, or whatever. And we just it's a symbiotic relationship. It's been just amazing to see. And I've seen that happen several times.
And it's a multiple win situation, isn't it? It's not only a win-win for the students and for the communities, the ethical and moral reasons for doing it are obvious, but it's also an economically sound investment for funders who could do this. It's an incredible opportunity for them to fund such a training opportunity that provides outcomes for people who wouldn't normally access these outcomes.
And it also speaks so strongly to the power of the human-animal bond.
Yeah.
The bond that we share with animals. And again, so many, whether, it has been borne out in a number of studies that regardless of socioeconomic status, there are many things that people will do for their pets that they will not necessarily take the time to do for themselves. So we see this even about with moderate levels of exercise. It's been shown that families with dogs generally get a little more exercise than those without, because you got to go out and walk the dog. And there are, again, people who will do that for their dog, but won't necessarily take the time to do that for themselves. So it's a very powerful part of being human is our interaction with animals. And we are just beginning to learn about some of the power of that bond and the potential that it has to improve the quality of health for both people and their companion animals.
Isn't that the truth, Andrew? And affecting non-communicable diseases that are responsible for 70% of mortality worldwide, leading cause of disability, being able to have pets and being able to do some of the physical activity will actually help to reduce the burden of those diseases, which are only growing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that was it. It comes back to that concept of One Health, right? That
Yeah.
It's all inextricably linked. And you mentioned that in your opening comments, and this is yet another example of that.
And I'm glad you spoke about that, because the WVMC under your leadership has really done a lot of work in creating a One Health educational framework, which is so important to address a myriad of problems, including antimicrobial resistance, which the WVMC's had a leadership role in. Can you share a little bit about those One Health educational products that you created, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to, that kind of big picture thing, we will all benefit if the more that we can collaborate together on these efforts, because it won't do, we simply can't get to where we need to be if each of our health professions operates in its own silo. We need the silos, right, to develop the depth of knowledge in our individual spheres and to develop our sense of professional identity. But at the same time, we need to build bridges among all of those silos so that we're sharing our expertise and working together collaboratively to solve some of these really serious problems. You mentioned antimicrobial resistance, and to me, this is, and to many others, one of the most significant threats that we are facing in healthcare generally. And so we all need to come together to solve this problem. Much has been said about the use of antimicrobials in animal production. And indeed, that has been the source of antimicrobial resistance. But we're making a great deal of progress in limiting that, and also even in companion animal use. So right now, there are a number of initiatives underway to limit the use, especially of antimicrobials and antibiotics and antifungals that are of importance to human health care. But the other piece we need to remember is that all antibiotic use, whether it's in people or in animals or on plants, it ends up in the environment. And so all of that use is has the potential to create resistance simply by its the interaction of those products with microbes in the environment. And this is why it calls for a One Health approach. It is not sufficient, and we cannot make progress if all we do is point at one another and say, well, the problem is overuse in animal production. No, the problem is inappropriate use in human medicine, where people start taking an antibiotic and they don't finish the course, and that promotes resistance. It's all of us working together to find other ways to limit this resistance. And here's just a quick plug, Keith, for the role of technology. I believe we're on the verge of being able, through genetic modification, to perhaps in many cases eliminate the need for using antimicrobial agents entirely. And this will have a significant impact on our planetary health. So those are things that are in that hold great promise.
Well, we'd love to talk a lot about that. That sounds fascinating. I know we in medicine tend to focus on our utilization of antimicrobial agents for humans and neglect the other side of this coin that you've well described, that we have to work together on this. And the AAVMC has played a significant leadership role in this space. Which brings me to the point, Andrew, we've spoken about how important veterinarians are and veterinary medicine is, veterinary science is to our well-being broadly based. But there's a huge deficit in veterinarians around the world. Can you share with us a little bit about how big that deficit is and what we need to do to rectify it?
Yeah, it's a problem exacerbated by a number of factors. One is that their demand for veterinary services has increased exponentially over the last several decades. Couple that with the fact that let's just stay with the United States right now, is that we have had virtually zero growth in the number of veterinary schools and seats that are available for quite some time. Now, that's been changing over the last decade, but it has simply not kept up with the increased demand. And now the increasing retirement or retirement eligibility for people in this career field. So right now we're faced with some pretty serious shortages across all sectors of the veterinary medical profession, including companion animal care, food animal production, equine health, public health, research. All of those areas are suffering right now. And so what that has led to is an increased demand for veterinary medical education, and the market is responding. We are aware of 12 new programs that have announced their intention to establish a school or college of veterinary medicine here in the United States. And that would be an almost unprecedented, 30% growth in the number of schools that we have. Right now, we have about 33. So that is a pretty substantial growth. But there are some who say that even that expansion will not fully meet the the projected need by 2035. So there still may well be a deficit. And here's the other important thing, Keith, and that is that even if we meet the current demand for veterinary services, unless we have some excess capacity, we cannot grow into some of these other areas where there's great potential for veterinary medicine to contribute to solving large societal problems. So we need to not only meet our current demand, but we also need to have some capacity to grow into new areas. And as we might say, to boldly go where no veterinarian has gone before. You need to have some capacity to do that.
Yeah, sounds like a good slogan, Andrew, that the AAVMC we might see in the near future.
Indeed.
And as the issues and challenges we have, and we spoke about some of them, AMR to pandemic prevention, food security, economic security, NCDs, and more. The demand for veterinarians, as you mentioned, is going to grow. One thing I learned at your conference this year, which was a fascinating presentation on when kids actually make important professional decisions. And the presenter, who was not a veterinarian, as you know so well, she said that kids often make decisions about their career choices in middle school. And so how do we actually do a better job of engaging young people in high school and middle school?
Well, this is a very important part of our recruitment strategy. And by the way, I mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation. In fact, veterinary medicine is different from all the other health professions. A much higher percentage of applicants to our programs, to our veterinary schools, would say they developed an interest in veterinary medicine at an even earlier age,
Wow.
many as young as 3 and 4 and 5 years old. And that's astounding, that it's just a different concept. And I think it has to do with, a young child's development, and they learn about, their parents and themselves and their siblings and all of that. And then also animals. And it just is a very appealing to young children to learn about animals. And for that reason, like I said, we have a substantially higher percentage of our applicants and then enrolled students who would say they developed their interest in veterinary medicine at a very early age. But it is true that it's about middle school, that age, that a young person develops a realistic concept of career and thinking about jobs like that. So my view is that we need to reach much earlier in the educational process to talk to young people about careers and I would say we start with the big picture. That is science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine, right? And you start talking about, what is the role of the health professions? And that's something we can all work on together, right? So we can work with pharmacy and dentistry and nursing and medicine and veterinary medicine, all working together to talk to young people broadly about health careers in the health professions. And then at around high school, perhaps, that's when you can start differentiating between, well, here's what it would mean to be a dentist versus a physician versus a veterinarian, and keep working together. So I think there's a great deal that we can work on together at those early ages, and to do some outreach there.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Because you can really, at that formative years, I know I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was a little boy, and so I'm part of that group, right? So I empathize. But it is true, if you can capture them during that time and they can be exposed to people in the field, it can be life-changing in a very positive way. So, and finally, just on one last point before I turn it over to you, Andrew, for other things you may want to add, and mental health is an issue that affects every profession. And one thing I learned at your conference was actually how depression and suicide is a very real challenge amongst veterinarians, as it is amongst many, but it is particularly so in amongst veterinarians. But you've really done some amazing work in trying to do outreach and provide access to care or identify people at risk. You've done a lot in the profession. Can you share a little bit about the challenge and also some of the work you've done? Because I think all of us can learn from it.
Well, thank you for those comments, Keith. And you're right. This is an issue that affects veterinary medicine, but as you said, is across all the health professions, issues with mental health and suicide. So I would start by saying that one of the most important things that we can do at the association level, where we work with all of the veterinary schools, in this case in the US and Canada, and then our members around the world, is to provide resources for our member institutions as they work with more directly with their communities. And I know, as I'm sure you do as an association manager, is that the only way that you can get a project like this moving is to dedicate time and resources to getting it done. And in our case, we were the very first of the health professions education associations to hire a permanent full-time person at the association level to work on well-being. And that person then helped organize all the resources across all of our member institutions. And that's what enabled them to come together more efficiently and work together to address these problems, to share their best practices, their ideas, what's working at their institution, the challenges that they're having. So number one, from an association management standpoint, to meet the needs of our member institutions, we dedicated the time, the resources, meaning the time and the personnel to help lead that effort. The next thing that we have been doing, and this is broadly across that we're all working on together, is to destigmatize help-seeking behavior for people with mental health issues. The fact is that every single one of us faces challenges in our life, sometimes every day. And each one of us will face sometimes catastrophic events, a serious illness, the death of a loved one, a divorce, any number of these types of things. We don't get to choose what it is or when it happens. It's a virtual certainty that it's going to happen to each one of us. So how do we prepare for that event? How do we learn to deal with those types of things? And I speak personally about my own challenges in my own career that I've had dealing with issues of depression and anxiety, and how I was reluctant to seek care myself. But then I realized that it was impacting my ability, this was when I was in the military, to accomplish the mission. And so for each one of us, when we're faced with those problems, unless we take the personal responsibility to take care of ourselves, then we cannot accomplish our mission. And that's what I learned, and that's what encouraged me to take the necessary steps to deal with the challenges that I was facing. And I've learned that it's important for me to share that story as a person in a visible position of leadership, so that others know that, no, this wasn't just, a perfectly straightforward path from starting to finish that went without any blemishes. I had my share of ups and downs, as I expect every single person does. And sharing that experience with others has been a very important part of my journey.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing. And then I think the fact that a person like you, and you said in your as a leader in the space, gives other people permission to acknowledge that. Because when you travel, particularly, is one of the things I learned is that veterinarians often practice alone. So when you're alone, dealing with difficult things, you sometimes feel very isolated. So hearing somebody like yourself talk about this, not only for veterinarians but for everybody, it really gives everybody permission to acknowledge that this is a normal part of human existence. So thank you, Andrew, for doing that, and for really, really pointing the way and sharing, what you've done at the AAVMC with all of us, because we're all in this boat together. And thank you for being a friend to CUGH, and we really look forward to continuing to work with the WVMC and yourself in any capacity in the future. So anything else you want to add finally to the audience?
No, it's not much, Keith. I just appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and to share this information with your audience, and look forward to continuing to work with you and CUGH in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. We value the partnership, to be sure. And to everybody, please look at the AAVMC's website. Look at our website at cugh.org. Much thanks again to Dr. Andrew MacCabe, the CEO of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges, and also to Sarah McKee for producing this and a series of leader interviews. Thank you so much, Andrew. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.